Well, good afternoon, everyone. So we all know that governance and policy is, local governance and policy is challenging in the best of times, but it is especially so with the numerous environmental challenges before us. In the sixth and final panel, Decision-Making and Planning at the Local Level, we will hear from practitioners, practitioners, planners, and scholars on the influences and the ways that communities navigate these processes. While all of our panelists are going to speak to decision-making and planning, they do cover a wide range of environmental policy areas, including outdoor recreation, transportation, food waste, and conserving of green space. So our first presentation today is Invest in Trails and the Public Will Respond. And the presenters are Travis Glazier, the Director of the Office of Environment for Onondaga County, and Dan Kwasnowski, the Planning Director for Syracuse Onondaga County Planning Agency.
Hi, good afternoon. Dan and I talked it over. I'm going to try and run through this just so we keep on time, but Dan's got a lot of information. He'll be able to answer a lot of questions. So, I'm Travis Glazier. I'm the Director of the Office of Environment for Onondaga County. Our Office of Environment's been heavily involved in our community's efforts to try and expand our trail system. Onondaga County has had historically a series of different trail systems which were disconnected. And the pieces that were separating them were large infrastructure barriers. So we had a city's creek walk system. It was a 3-mile trail system in the city of Syracuse. It runs along Onondaga Creek. There was our Loop the Lake Trail, which is the county's primary kind of premier park of Onondaga Lake Park. It's a trail system which has been envisioned as a loop all the way around Onondaga Lake, our urban water body here for, since the 1930s. And then there's a trail system, an Erie Canal system in the west and eastern areas. And obviously, when the state came out with its goals for Empire State Trail, it provided our community a unique opportunity to try and bridge some of these gaps. And so in Onondaga County, we literally had to bridge a massive gap, which was 3 railroad tracks, which spanned a long distance, but then also traveled over a hazardous waste site and also landed on a brownfield site, and is adjacent to our wastewater treatment facility, which is the largest wastewater treatment facility in the region. So there was a tremendous amount of infrastructure, there were environmental challenges, and then obviously for any of our municipal partners, working with CSX was the most difficult of all by far. But because our trail system throughout, the city, the county, was built in such a way that it was intended to take a larger amount of traffic than what was being used at the time, having this large piece of infrastructure has made sense. What's happened is more and more people have been using this because the connection exists, because we've interconnected and tied our city trail system into our county trail system, and EST, the Empire State Trail, tied our eastern and western trail systems into this centralized system. Now we see more and more people using our trails than ever before, and we're thankful that all of our trails were built out in such a way that they could accommodate the large volume of users that are now coming. I can tell you 30 years ago, the idea of building trails, this bridge was $8 million to build this bridge. 30 years ago, the idea of building an $8 million pedestrian bridge was asinine. But today we're looking at building another one to finish our loop around the lake on the eastern side, because it's so popular, because there's recognition not only of the popularity here, but also the value to the community as an alternative piece of transportation infrastructure. In addition, there's pressure points which cause increased usage of these. So the pandemic obviously had a ton of effects on our entire community, but one of the big ones in our park system is we saw more usage in our parks and on our trails than ever before, and coincidentally, we opened these trail systems. So between EST, the expansion of the creek walk, which now goes to the south side of Syracuse into some of our poorest census tracts in the country, and then also eastward into DeWitt, it was a combined 12 miles of additional trail. And pandemic hit while all these trails were coming online. And now that people have been out there and went out and wanted to get outside and get, interact with the environment again, the usage went through the roof. And once people go there and have a good experience, they keep coming back. And as more people learn, the people who are coming back are continuing to come back. So you need to, from a community's perspective, plan on that growth. You build a trail system not for today, but for 5 and 10 years from now. Because today it seems a little crazy to build an $8 million bridge, but it's even crazier to short step it and have people trying to cross intersections and doing things and realize later on we should have done a trail bridge because there's so many people using this and it's creating traffic problems with our normal car traffic. So planning's a big part of this. That's really where Dan's expertise comes in. So another key part of this, and Mayor Roche, you mentioned the protected bike lanes. This is in the city of Syracuse here. It's a big investment to do those. They are, but they pay off. They pay huge dividends because people are more willing to use them. To prove that's a little bit difficult because our trails, unlike our highway systems, we don't monitor them quite as much. So you also have to think about what are the metrics you're going to use to evaluate so you can go back and try and push for additional trail expansions. So trying to build in those monitoring. Most of our monitoring historically has been done anecdotally, everything from our parks department saying that more and more people are leaving poop bags on the side of the trail because they're walking their dogs out there than ever before, to myself and Dan. We're not just the presidents of the Hair Club for Men. We're also clients. We both ride the bikes frequently, so we see the trails being used at all different times of the day. So getting out there and experiencing them and recognizing this has really been the driver for Onondaga County, the city of Syracuse. But actually building in real metrics, whether it's the little bumper things they use on the roads, there's other monitoring tools that Dan showed me, trying to build those into the system, recognizing if you're just getting off in the start of this, building out a trail, that you need to build an argument that they're being used. The second thing is trying to get to a point where you develop an it factor, right? There's these communities out west and in Vermont where trails and the interconnectivity of trails and people's usage of alternative forms of transportation is really ingrained in what it is to be part of that community. And that's really what brings people to your community. It makes you special. Now, what I'll show in the next couple of slides, Dan's efforts are really to try and help our adjacent communities start to tie in and build in and recognize that it factor. So, how do you go from a bunch of islands into a comprehensive system? Right now, we really have, if you think about this like a sewer system, we have trunk lines built. We've got these major EST running through our community, and we need to start building out the branches. So Dan's team at SOCBA are putting together a comprehensive plan for these different communities to start to develop how they're going to build out their trail systems and interconnect into the Empire State Trail. And a study is underway. It's done by our Syracuse Onondaga County Planning Agency. See, this is why I brought them. But as you can see here in this map, the red line is the Empire State Trail. Each of those individual boxes are focal points within the plan itself of where different communities of focus are to help them also plan from a community development standpoint, what are the resources they're going to want to put there? When somebody's riding along the Empire State Trail or when somebody's perhaps even in DeWitt or Camillus and wants to go for a ride off somewhere, they want to go to a coffee shop, they want to go to a bar, they want to go something, they want to have that. How do you get the communities that are otherwise kind of detached from this asset to recognize the value of investing in their main street so that cyclists want to come in and visit from all these different communities? Doing an inventory of understanding what your assets are is key, and these heat maps indicate where those different pedestrian demands are, employment density, and population density exists, which is part of the study. This is the one I really want to get to. These other kind of trail networks that span off of this trunk line, as I mentioned. You've got our Loop the Lake Trail, as you can see, adjacent to the trail, but even moving northward, there's disconnected trail systems. And then along the western part, so kind of in these areas, you've got smaller villages which are they're former Erie Canal villages which are developed and were kind of left on their own with, a long time ago when the Erie Canal went out, but they've been striving to try and develop a quality of life that people seek out. And these trails are an opportunity to really bring those communities into the fold with our central suburban and urban areas. So, 1 minute, okay. So you need to be able to identify where these areas are. Planning is a key part of this. Recognizing the build out, recognizing where your opportunities are, and looking ahead at what the next steps are in your trail development, trail building, whether it's something like your bike lanes or it's a dedicated isolated trail. The better you build them, the better you plan out for the future use and not today's use is always going to pay off dividends because people want a good experience and they're going to keep coming back when it's a good experience. And then, frankly, don't be afraid to invest. These pay off. The quality of life, what they do for home values in different pieces, it pays dividends. So with that, I will conclude. That's Dan over there, and we'll be ready for some questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Travis. Our second presentation today is Preventing and Reducing Wasted Food in Counties, Towns, and Villages, Case Studies from the Rochester and Albany metro regions. And the presenters are Caitlin Stack-Whitney, who is a fellow at the Rockefeller Institute of Government, and her co-presenter is Ariella Knight, who is an MFA Industrial Design candidate at the Rochester Institute of Technology.
Hello. Today we're presenting work in progress as part of the Multi-Scales Recipe Network. Let's see. Oh, stand by. There we go. Oh. Okay, here we go. Let's see. So the NRDC estimates that 40% of food in the United States is never eaten. Recipes stands for Resilient, Equitable, and Circular Innovations with Partnerships and Education Synergies. So Recipes is a national network whose goal is to create scalable knowledge that transforms our wasteful system to promote sustainability, equity, and resilience.
So wasted food is also an issue in New York specifically. Almost a third of the state's solid waste is in organics, and this is also a big opportunity. So many of you are also aware probably that this is a rapidly evolving situation, especially here in New York. So specifically the recent food donation and recycling law requires some businesses and institutions to donate or recycle organics when possible. So this went into effect on January 1st, and the New York State Food Donation and Food Scraps Recycling Law requires businesses and institutions that generate an average of 2 tons of wasted food per week. They must donate the excess food and recycle all remaining food scraps if they're within 25 miles of an organics recycler. So the facility has to exist already. So the New York law is actually a great example. So here's a statewide law, but how is it actually being implemented and experienced on the ground? Is it happening in the same way across the state? So much more is known at the federal and state levels about the situations with wasted food and wasted food policies. And so we wanted to look local, very local, specifically at counties, towns, cities, and villages. And so our objective was to examine choices and values by governments in particular at these smaller scales, looking at regulations, but also resource allocations, right? Not just mandates, but also budgets, resources, and other kinds of public records to understand how wasted food policies and decisions are being designed and reported and implemented at those local scales.
So our initial round of data collection is ongoing, and it has been examining counties, towns, and villages in the greater Rochester metro region, so that's 6 counties, and the capital region, which is 11 counties, and that includes Albany. For each municipality within the 2 regions, we searched for and compiled any and all policies related to food and farming, waste and recycling, zoning, sustainability, and environmental quality. We used a set of keywords to search for those. Additionally, we examined community plans, sustainability, and climate action plans. When we're done, we will have built a database of local level food waste and related policies, plans, and budget allocations. So, using the ReFed policy recommendations for localities, and that's this right here, we are assessing the presence and diversity of these practices around the 2 metro regions. So ReFed is a national nonprofit that focuses on food waste. In recent years, it partnered with the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic to research federal and state food waste policies and make recommendations for improvement. They identified these 9 opportunities where local governments can intervene.
Okay. I would say at the start of this, we also thought, oh, why has no one done this in the local level? And quickly learned why. There's less work done on this in the local level, which we'll explain more about. So we're still finalizing all of our data collection for the capital region in particular. This takes a really long time, is the short answer, to actually do this work, to collect all of this information about every single municipality. And we only did it for part of the state so far. It is a lot of work and it's a lot of data. So what we wanted to do for today was actually share 3 examples that stood out to us as we've been doing this collection and building our database, and explain how they fit within these opportunity areas that have been identified. And so the first one I want to just share briefly is about the town of Canandaigua, which is in Ontario County. And so what we've noticed is that their practices so far are aligning with one of those identified opportunities, specifically to disincentivize food from landfills in particular. So they actually accept food scraps at their transfer station, and this encourages residents to separate out their food waste, and they're doing this at no cost. So why might municipalities be making this decision, right? It's to reduce pressure on the landfill, but also you have to do something with the organic material, right? So every municipality is already dealing with this material. It's just a matter of how.
So our second example is at the city of Albany. And so let's see. The city is partially or fully supporting 3 options for residents supporting at-home drop-off or pickup of compost. And this includes educating residents on the different options and how to use them. So Albany here is implementing 2 of the recommendations for local government by discouraging food waste from landfills and through education. So why might localities choose this? Communities that want climate smart certification can get points towards that via organic waste programs, so as outlined here. And let's see, the city of Albany has the certification. And there are also grants that municipalities can get to adopt these practices.
Okay, the third example we just wanted to touch on briefly was in Columbia County. So Columbia County is implementing 2 of these recommended opportunities for local governments, both by discouraging food from going into the landfill, by having their waste stations actually accept food scraps. This is still on a pilot basis, and there's only a limited amount of food scraps that they're accepting. So it's a short list, basically, of fruit and vegetable waste. They're not taking everything at this point, and as part of this pilot, it is free for residents. They also integrated that second piece of consumer education into their first ever climate carnival that they hosted, right? Trying to bring joy, not just that feeling of environmental responsibility to this, right? They had their first ever climate carnival in July of this year. And so really they're just testing this out is what we're finding. And so why might communities be doing this, right? This is another community that is participating in climate smart communities, but what we also wanted to point out was that we've noticed in our data collection that whether or not a community is actually certified as a climate smart community, communities that have climate plans, we have found to be more likely to actually be taking action on reducing food waste. So what we see this as an indication is that municipalities like Columbia County are connecting the dots between this awareness of how reducing food waste can help them meet their climate goals. I think one of the other things that we've noticed, though, with this list from REFED is that the list of things you can do for certification is actually shorter than the recommended steps. And so we wouldn't want municipalities to stop at the recommendation for certification. There's actually more steps that you can continue to take to reduce food waste. We've also seen this in our own area, right? We came here from Rochester, and Monroe County has a draft climate plan that's circulating, and it also has a major piece of it as food waste reduction. So our next steps for this analysis are to finish collecting all of our data about the capital region and then start diving into analyzing it in a more quantitative sense, and especially to understand how resources are allocated. And then for all of these areas, specifically to look at school districts, right, which don't always align neatly with those municipal boundaries, but within these two regions in particular, especially because two of the ways that local areas can really reduce their food waste footprint has to do with addressing school lunch programs and what happens with organics waste in schools. We can say that from our data collection thus far, we're finding that municipalities across both regions have a really long way to go to achieving those recommended 9 areas of opportunity of what local governments can do. So we've chose to highlight some strengths here of what municipalities are doing. We're really excited, though, to see how recent policy changes like the state law might actually change this. So for example, one of the things that REFED recommends local municipalities do is actually look at their food safety laws and clarifying them for donation. And so with the recent state regulation, this may actually lead people to clarify those donation laws now that more organizations are going to be looking to donate that excess food. Then we'll also be looking more at participation, so thinking about how are people getting involved, whether or not that's youth, but in part because we see more communities that have a sustainability committee, having the committee is associated with taking more of these actions, right? So understanding that participation, also in light of the recent Department of Justice guidance on accessibility for public meetings, right? So those are our next steps that were planned for this analysis. So we want to thank all of our colleagues in and beyond this network. I especially want to thank Ariella and her co-author Claire, who's not here today, who have learned all the ins and outs of local government websites, some of which do not exist, right? And some of which do not use e-codes, as I'm sure many of you know. So it takes a lot of work to do all of this, and so I'm eternally grateful to them. And so we welcome questions and comments and connecting with us and the broader network as this project continues to grow. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Our final presentation for the panel is Kevin Bronner, who is a public service professor at the Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy at the University of Albany. And he will be talking about financing green space land using purchases for local governments using municipal bonds.
Lisa, how do we advance it here? Yes, okay, all right. Okay, I'm going to talk about using bonds to finance green space in a local government. The topic could be extended to many of these other projects I've seen today. And I'm going to maintain that the idea of using bonds to finance environmental assets it's really starting to gain in momentum right now, last couple of years. So what I did here, I did like a 25-year study. I'm an accounting and finance person. I'm not really, I don't consider myself an environmentalist. I support a lot of environmental projects I have over the years. I started doing that in around 1978. I worked on the first New York State Energy Master Plan. So I've been doing this for a long time, but I don't want to act like I'm a scientist in the environment. But I have accounting and finance skills that I think can help our effort here. So just very briefly, I did a 25-year study for this town of Colony. It's in Albany County. It's surrounded by cities, basically, on 3 sides, and on the 4th side, there's a big environmental preserve. Now, the issue for the environmental community is we want to maintain some of the green space land in this town. So what I did this study to show that you can really look at bond financing techniques that were used over the last 25 years, and you can find periods where green space bonds were issued for green space. So if you look at it, I've split this into two periods. You can see them there. In the first period, it's explanatory. They issued about 16.7 million. And just for disclosure, I was on the Town of Colony Town Board during the first period here. Then after that time, it really hasn't been used very much because they basically haven't developed much new green space. So the simple idea here is we want to gather green space if necessary. Every local government doesn't need this. Like there's other towns I'm familiar with in the Capital District that may not, their green space isn't being chewed up the way ours is because we're surrounded by a bunch of cities. So the idea is if you want to have green space or any other environmental asset, you can develop it using municipal bonds. These are just some of the projects that were in there. There was a golf course. We acquired land. There was a big new town park. Now, the new town park one is interesting. I went to it yesterday. I wanted to see it again. And you go to it. It's right in the middle of our town. There's no user fees. It's adjacent to a bunch of neighborhoods. And every time you go in it, it's wonderful. You see hundreds of people using it. And over the year, it's going to be thousands of people. Now, 25 years ago, this was earmarked to be just another office park. And if it were an office park, the tax base of the local government would have been increased, and they would have made money on it. So now, if you buy the land, which we did, the first problem we have is we have to pay for the cost of the land, and then we have to pay the interest on the bonds. So just the basic concept of acquiring green space, there's a negative incentive to some of the politicians, not all of them, but some of them, because it's going to cost them money and they're not going to get tax revenue. So if I just made a hypothetical, little simple example. If you have a 50-acre site that, now I've come along, I want it to be green space, and somebody says, well, a developer wants to build houses on it. So here's what could happen. You could build about 50 houses on it, and the taxes would be about $10,000 each. There'd be yearly tax revenue of about $500,000. And the town doesn't get all the taxes because the school district and the counties get money. But the town itself gets money from this. So they have a real incentive to say, well, Kevin, it's nice you want green space, but we want the tax revenue. So that's an incentive. It's a reality we have to face here. So then if they have a developer develop it, then there's real benefits to them. And there's a political side to this too, because if you look, I often look at political fundraising, and you can see the developers are big fundraisers. So that's another incentive. I'm not going to get into it too much, but it's just part of the, I think most people would see something like that. Okay, so my basic idea here is that if you want to have some kind of environmental asset that you don't think you have any money for, start thinking about issuing municipal bonds to purchase the asset. I'm in the Government Finance Officers Association. They had a nice story this spring in our journal about long-term debt capacity. Most governments can issue a lot more debt. So the Government Finance Officers Association said you should use strategic planning to scan the environment and then develop long-term strategy and financial planning targets. So we still have a group of people in my town, I live there, I'm not a member of the government or anything, who want to develop more green space. So what I would recommend is that you identify the green space, within reason that you think you can develop. And what we have to do here is have a long-term financial plan, which is very simple to do, to purchase some of the bonds. But the big item here is that environmental considerations must be given more weight in the decision. And as I'm going to discuss in the next slide, I can show you how this is really beginning to happen, so it's really getting interesting. And New York State could develop a grant program to help some of these localities with this lost revenue, like I showed in that little model. Now, the last piece of this, and I've done this study was part of a larger environmental study that I did for this town, and I had a lot of issues in it, but this bond finance one was really interesting. And now, today, what's happening is there's this concept, I don't know how widespread it is. I mean, I'm a bond finance accounting person, so I have some knowledge about this, but there's environmental, social, governance financing. It's an idea that's coming along. And what they do, Wall Street and a lot of the bond rating firms have these documents up. So does the Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates bond and all sorts of financings. They're trying to put an environmental and a social element in the sales of bonds. So what's probably going to happen here with, I'm going to just talk mainly about Moody's Investors Service. They're going to develop a scale for everyone's municipal bonds, and it's going to have an ESG score, environmental, social, governance risk, and it's going to consider carbon risk. So your bond will be rated CIS1 if it's positive on the environment. You can see there's a scale there. So like the bike paths we just saw, if they use bonds to finance those, that would be a CIS1 positive. And that means they're going to sell the Onondaga County bonds at a lower cost, and it's going to help the environment. So it's giving us an incentive to promote environmental concepts. So with that, my slide will be on the website, I assume, and if you ever have any further questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll open it for audience questions. Yes, in the back.
I can speak up. I have a question for Caitlin and Ariel, who's right now. So it's great to hear about the efforts to reduce food waste, and composting is great, but it's a shred above landfill in terms of the environmental benefit. So what did you uncover? What advice do you have to, how do we increase food donations, right? I mean, we compost here at the inside, but look at this, like a dozen sandwiches over there, a salad, like a bunch of bagels outside of forcing everyone here to take some food. Like, what are the efforts or what are the current programs in place now to help institutions get that food to the people in need and help dispel the myths that there's liability concerns when there's not if you follow good practices? From my understanding, I know Cornell has a whole legal sheet about it, that there is not these, a lot of these organizations will just, oh, you can't do that, it's against, liability. But it's actually, there's a lot of protection for food donors. So if you could just speak a little bit to that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. So you're speaking exactly to what we were trying to raise at the end, which is that we're really hoping that this new recent state law will push more municipalities to clarify food donation and food safety regulations so that organizations feel empowered that they can safely do this. So actually before our panel, we were just chatting about how much power regulators have when they release fact sheets. It sounds so simple, but letting people know that they are in the clear empowers them to do innovative things, to know that they are not taking risks. And so this is really an area where we hope that the recent state law change can help municipalities make clearer for the organizations that are in their areas that you can do this. And I know that that's something that Ariella was looking at this summer, was in part that we see a lot of food banks and organizations that could be taking more of this food, and we want to see more of those municipalities partnering with those organizations, and have not seen a lot of that in terms of actual partnerships or putting resources into that, other than pointing out to residents that it exists and they could go there. So I think that's a real opportunity for municipalities to clarify that this is legal and how can you do it safely and comply with whatever local food safety regulations are in place. And some of that is just getting in front of it to share that information with the people who will be donating that food and who will be looking for those avenues, in part because of this state law change.
Thank you.
I believe there was a question at the table right in front.
Hi, sorry I talk so much, but I have another question. For Travis and Dan, how do we get a copy of that trail report?
It's on SMTC's website, the Syracuse
Awesome.
Metropolitan Transportation Council. If you just go to the publications tab,
Great.
it should be right at the top because it's one of the more recent publications.
And
A
how
little bit.
can towns like the town of Manlius work more collaboratively with your organizations to implement the awesome work that you guys are doing? Like, I don't know that we've really spoken to you at all in the last couple of years.
Well, yeah, we've been pretty busy putting together funding to really advance that plan, which at its core is really providing those. The real key thing is to have a similar level, kind of what Travis was talking about, similar level investment, not just a wayfinding sign or, right along the shoulder or whatever, but having like a protected bike lane that connects the EST into our commercial centers. And there's actually 2 major projects in Manlius that we're trying to get funding right now on county roads. We're kind of starting with our own roads for the most part because we have control of them. It's a little bit easier, and then pushing the state and then helping towns and villages. And I would pay attention to next year's budget at the county level, because there's going to be significant funding to implement our Greenways and Blueways program, which is associated with our emerging countywide plan called Plan Onondaga. So there's going to be lots of different ways. Honestly, as a planning director, when you're creating your own comprehensive plan, which I know the town is doing the same, you're kind of holding your breath and kind of building resources so that when you do finally get that plan adopted, you can kind of run with it. So that's kind of the state I'm in right now, is just waiting for that to be wrapped up, and so we can move forward with a lot of things.
Yeah, since we got elected, it's just been, well, we're writing the comprehensive plan, so we can't do anything. So 2.5 years of that.
It's a common dance that you have to go through, but yeah.
Yeah. I just had one more question on the bonds. The town has thrown around this idea of issuing a bond for a new town hall, which we would try to make as climate and like LEED certified, whatever we could do. But we don't know how to build that or move toward that. And there's been a lot of fear with the town board about issuing a bond. What resources are available for municipalities to learn more about that and move forward with issuing a bond?
Your local government should have a bond council that gives you all the advice about issuing a municipal bond. And then there's firms that also organize the issuance of the municipal bonds. Now, if you don't have any bonds, you've got to seek that type of advice out from somebody. So the information would be readily available, and they would be able to, if you're thinking of building a new town hall, like if you look at this building has a lot of environmental effects on it.
We got a tour of this building in consideration of our new town hall.
Yeah, so it has a lot of environmental effects on it. So let's say they issue, I'll just keep the numbers round, $1 million bond for this building. What you could do is go through all the environmental effects that are present in this building and say that this, remember I had a scale up there, this would be a building that should get the highest environmental scale. And with the idea that, well, there's a lot of people who would want to buy environmental bonds from environmental friendly entities, and they will lower the cost on it. That's the beauty of that last slide I put up there.
I do ESG in my other job, so
Okay.
I was very
Yes.
excited to see that on the slide.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Other questions?
So are elections required for bonds of the type you're talking about? For land purchase?
Not
It
really.
varies by state.
Yeah, in our I was on a town board for 8 years, and I was the like a liaison to the town controller, and you can just issue bonds, have the town board pass it. You have to go with all the rules and regulations they have to issue a bond, but governments can issue a bond, and the state has a cap on the amount of bonds that governments can issue. It's like 7% of your fair value assessment. I know this is getting weedy here, but there is a cap, but most governments aren't anywhere near that. So from what I saw today, I would, without knowing too much about the, Onondaga County, I don't know a lot about, but I would say they could issue bonds to finance some of those pathways if they had to.
Well, it's state law, and my experience in local government is out in Colorado, and general obligation bonds are treated very differently from revenue bonds.
Here you can issue them.
So that was an issue. But to ask a little bit more about the bonds real quick would be, have you looked at how many localities in New York State have issued the bonds that you're talking about for land acquisition, and also evaluating that enabling statute to make it easier and to provide that grant funding you talked about?
I haven't, because my study that I presented here today came out of a larger environmental study. But it would be very simple I had a slide up there. It had the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, and it had an EMMA database. I can get into anybody in this room who's with a local government. I can get in 5 minutes and figure out if you issued any environmental friendly bonds. That's what I did for this one town. I did it for a 25-year period. But I can look at any bond today, and there's a form that the Securities and Exchange Commission mandates be in the bond, and it will list the project. So if I look at this government mentioned here, and I see a town, like a green Deal Town Hall, we'll call the project, and I can assign that a very high environmental score if need be. But to answer your question, I haven't done it for other localities yet, but it would be very simple to do.
Okay, we have someone patiently waiting in the back.
Is it on? This is for Kevin and possibly Travis if he'd like to add on. But Dr. Warner, I live in Guilderland, which is right around the corner from Colony and the Crossings Park, which has become something of interest even to the planners in Guilderland who think that they'd like to try something like that. But when I'm reviewing grants for the Department of State throughout a region, we could do a wide range of things for the program I run, and I have a finance background, so I try to quantify the return on investment. How would you, and Travis, perhaps with Trails too, how would you say is the best way to quantify the return on investment when looking at this? Because you could say you're going to get so many new users per year. How do you monetize that to some value that people would be convinced it's a worthwhile investment? It obviously has been, but how do you monetize that?
Yeah, the town of Guilderland is right next to the town I'm talking about. And the way I would monetize it, you would do a market study, do a survey of some of the town residents, and you ask a very simple question. You say, how much would you be willing to pay to have a brand-new town park? You have a Tathwasenda Park in your town, a beautiful park I've been with many times. You do a survey, and that gives you the value. And then you have a representative survey, and then you extend it over the base of people in your community, and that would give you the value to the community of the park. We've done this in the town of Colony. We have a center. It's like a YMCA center that the town, one of the 501Cs developed. We did it for that. And just on environmental issues, I did this 25 years ago for the state of New York. We came up with the idea, well, people want to buy green energy. So we had to quantify it. Our commission, I wasn't a commissioner, I was a staff person. So we had to sell it to our commissioners, and we did a survey of New York State, and we asked people, how much would you be willing to pay for green type energy? And we defined it. And they gave us an answer of 15 to 20%. And that really helped us sell the green energy idea. So my basic answer, do a survey to help quantify this. That'll give you a value of your park that you're talking about.
As a follow-up, I think having known people from Colony, they all appreciate the park, and I think it's helped attract more people to buy in the town. It's hard to tell. Prices certainly have gone up, and a lot of places have gone up, but wouldn't you say that this enhanced the value of the properties around it and the properties, the people that are using the park?
Yes, we do a comprehensive plan in the town. By we, I don't work for the town anymore. I've been going for like 15 years. So when I say we, I should say the town of Colony does a comprehensive plan, and they do a survey in that plan. They've done it in 2005, and they finished one in 2019. And they quantify the assets using this survey. And this Crossings Park, this was the one I had up here that was going to be an office park. And what they do, they ask people, what's your approval rating of that park? And it's about 85%. So people really like this type of concept.
So just to kind of add on to there, maybe have a little bit of a contrarian view. One of the challenges with trail development is this constant desire to kind of quantify the value of it, when in reality, these decisions, whether it's a comprehensive plan, whether it's a transportation plan for a community, it's a reflection of the values of that community and the value to them of what this asset is. And so when you try and quantify it by some measure of like it's got a return, the reality is in that community, if you're investing in stuff that the community doesn't want, that the residents don't want, the elected officials who made those decisions get voted out of office, right? There's your quantification. And so, or if you neglect things, right? If you're a mayor or a county executive that neglects the assets that you've invested in that people love and use, you get booted out of office. So when we're constantly, besides all the barriers we have, when we also have to come back and show the Department of State, the DEC, I'm sorry to pick on you because of the Department of State, but the folks who want to give us this money and want to set these barriers or these milestones of carbon neutrality, when we're trying to put things out there that accomplish this, but we're constantly getting back, we need to see proof that this was worthwhile. Frankly, the proof is our burden as local officials, right? The proof is on us to be able to return to our offices and be able to continue to do our work. So if the Department of State would just say, you know what, if it's in your plan, Dan, go for it. That'd be awesome.
I'll just add, real quick, that the concept of evaluating the increase in property value next to protected open space goes back to 1890 with Frederick Law Olmsted and the Emerald Necklace study in Boston. It's been repeated a million times since then. And even the IRS, if you donate property and your sister or your brother owns a house adjacent to it, they will actually tax the increase in value of that home based upon your donation. So I mean, it's just a thing. I mean, it's not. There's no question that it increases the value just of the properties next to it, but it also certainly makes your community more attractive to live in. It makes it a more desirable place to locate a business. All those wonderful quality of life things that are super important, especially in the Rust Belt, to make sure that you're constantly renewing and doing the things that Travis does, and taking some of these marginal lands and really kind of turning them into assets.
Okay, with that, I think we're going to close it out. Thank you again to our panelists.